Fujita Scale, Enhanced Fujita Scale. This podcast flips back and forth with these two terms for tornado measurements all the time. And as often as I have explained the difference and the history of the two, today it just means more. I am Chris May, host of This Day in Weather History, a podcast from the Weather Network in Canada. Today was the day when the first Canadian tornado would ever be rated using the Enhanced Fujita Scale. Look, it's exciting to me this day in weather history. I know, what a nerd! This clearly wasn't the only tornado to have roared through Dufferin County, but it was at the center of a fundamental change in how tornadoes were classified. It touched down in an area locally near Highway 10 and County Road 17 and packed powerful 135 to 167 kilometer per hour wind speeds. And although, as I mentioned, it was an early spring twister, it was the first to be recorded as an Enhanced Fujita Scale tornado in Canadian history, and it was rated EF1.
It's Paul Nanskavell. I'm the Dufferin County OPP media officer. Last night we had a severe thunderstorm warnings with hail and heavy rain. We had an idea that this weather system was coming through. At 5:43 p.m. our units were dispatched. First of all, the 7th line southwest, which is the road up to Riverview, a small village northwest of Shelburne. The hydro lines were pulled down there. The storm moved along County 17 and struck a barn on the 4th line southwest, tearing the east side of the barn off and tipping over a tree onto a boat.
What was impressive was that there was debris thrown 100 meters and embedded into the ground. It was not totally without widespread effect, as along its path, it did also still uproot trees and snap hydro poles. But that is just where our story begins. Remember that this day in weather history can be enjoyed a number of ways. Right now, you are listening to the full version of today's story on your favorite podcast provider, but there is also the daily podcast video short. They are shot right here in my podcast recording studio, so you get that perspective, and oftentimes they will include visuals from that day's event, from when it happened, in weather history. So after listening to the full story, go check out the podcast video short on television or online anytime at theweathernetwork.com/weather history.
We had the highways closed last night for several hours because there was quite a bit of debris on the roadway here, and we had to ensure that got cleaned up. There's a restoration company out here pulling the debris off the highway. There was lots of nails and all sorts of stuff that could have caused a lot of damage to cars had the highway not been cleaned up.
Up until this day in weather history, tornadoes in Canada were being classified based on the Fujita scale prior to upgrading to the EF classification. What's the difference, and why did we change? Let's start with the original Fujita scale. It was the one that had been used to assign tornado ratings since the year 1971. The Fujita, or F scale, was originally developed by Dr. Tetsuya Theodore Fujita to estimate tornado wind speeds. The basis for this analysis was from the damage that was left behind by a tornado. Survey teams would go out like an auto insurance adjuster. They would determine what was versus what was not caused by the tornado and how bad the damage was. But first, because this was 1971, and also because you need to start somewhere to learn and evolve, the original F scale proved over time to have some serious and legitimate limitations. For one, there was no concrete basis or consensus of damage indicators. Also, and this makes perfect sense, there was no account for construction quality and variability. Think of it. If the barn was weather-worn and weather-beaten already, it was likely coming down one day anyway, so did this tornado in fact inflict as much destruction as it appeared? Then, and this one needed modern satellite and radar analysis in order to be realized, there was no definitive correlation between damage and wind speed. Over time, and looking back, these limitations likely may have led to some tornadoes being rated in an inconsistent manner and, in some cases, overestimated as far as their true tornado wind speeds. Conversely, the newer Enhanced Fujita Scale, or the EF scale, was developed not by one enterprising young scientist, but rather by a forum of nationally renowned meteorologists and wind engineers. But remember, had we not had Dr. Fujita's work to use and grow from and pick apart, this esteemed collection of minds would never have developed this much better collective measurement system at all. The EF scale takes into account more variables than does the original F scale, including 28 damage indicators such as building types, structures, and trees. For each damage indicator, there are 8 degrees of damage, ranging from the beginning of visible damage to complete destruction of the damage indicator. The Enhanced Fujita Scale measures storms from EF0, the weakest end of the scale with winds of 90 to 130 kilometers per hour, all the way up to EF5, where winds exceed 315 kilometers per hour. And it was first put into play in Canada on this day in weather history. Tomorrow is April 19th, and we will be looking back on how the weather affected one of the most nightmarish and horrific disasters in Toronto's long history. We'll be looking at the Great Fire of 1904. It gutted the downtown core and incinerated most of the buildings in that area, and that's tomorrow on this day in weather history with me, your host, Chris May.